Sure, most of us recall, shortly after Pope Francis was elected, he gave an interview in which he was asked very directly, "Who is Jorge Bergoglio?" He said, "I am a sinner." That is the most accurate definition. It is not a figure of speech. It is not a literary genre. I am a sinner whom the Lord has looked upon. So somewhat surprising, because in answering the question regarding his fundamental identity, he did not give the more common answer that he is a beloved child of God. He said, "I am a sinner." But he seems to not have made this up on his own, because it's remarkably similar to what St. Paul says to Timothy. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Of these, I am the foremost. Big sinner. Sinfulness for us often carries this connotation of shame, of inherent badness, as if we are not good enough. And as a reaction, we can either use shame to harm or guilt others, or we can discard it as over-spiritualizing just the human condition. It seems to not be well understood. But I think that Pope Francis and St. Paul have a bit of a different understanding of sinfulness when they describe themselves so distinctly as sinners. Sinfulness, ultimately, is not just about us doing and saying bad things. It gets to the heart of something much deeper. That ultimately we did not create ourselves. We do not sustain ourselves. We don't give ourselves life. We can't even make ourselves happy, no matter how hard we try to make ourselves happy or find things to make ourselves happy. In saying that we are sinners, we're also saying we are so utterly, radically dependent on God. Sin is just looking for good things and coming up with emptiness. And going down that road leads to emptiness. So in saying we are sinners, we are saying, I admit there seems to be this unbridgeable gap between God and myself. And that's terrifying, that's daunting and beyond unfortunate. But it makes the readings from this whole weekend much more meaningful. Because in God's mercy to the prodigal son, to the lost sheep, the woman who found her coin, we are not hearing about a forgiveness that's just juridical, as if God is expunging our record, but that God is filling that gap. God is filling our emptiness. He is giving us life, freedom, the ability to love and show charity to one another. He's giving us absolutely everything. But there is always going to be, for us, brothers and sisters, a tension. As people who are striving to be disciples of Christ, striving to be preachers of His Word, sin and mercy are always going to exist within us in a very uncomfortable way. We are little walking contradictions all the time. And there is a temptation, I think, that we must avoid, both in what we say and what we do, that would give the impression that we don't acknowledge this kind of contradiction, or that we just ignore it and try to focus either all on the good or all on the bad. When we preach, we are not so much preaching and saying this message, this slogan, that if we just use the right amount of eloquence and charisma and intelligence, that then it'll be magically communicated. What are we preaching but what Paul preached, an example, a witness of someone who is a sinner, but has experienced the radical mercy of God. That's what I'm attracted to when I hear preaching, and I think that's what ultimately we all connect with. Likewise, when we live together, when we go home to our rooms, when we encounter each other at breakfast, wherever we may be, we must not make the mistake of thinking the antidote to sin is to live a perfect angelic life where we have figured out every possible way it could go wrong and have come up with every possible contingency. But rather, this existence, this tension exists even here. And if we're open to it, we can accept that this is where God's grace is working. Maybe it is more important to ask ourselves, what do we do once we have not lived up to the standard, or once somebody we love, a brother, has not lived up to the standard, rather than trying to make him and ourselves as perfect as we possibly can be. That is the grace of mercy that God offers us each day. That's the grace that ultimately makes a community of sinners the holy preaching. It's also the grace that has made the cross a sign of defeat and violence into a sign of redemption. The grace has made this bread into the Eucharist, grace that makes all of us sinners into trustworthy, appointed ministers of God's mission.